Hello and welcome to another video for the 2026 point in time here in the Indiana Balance of State. My name is Daniela Jordan Gonzalez, and this video is for um, a volunteer who will be conducting the point in time count in the region, or a pit coordinator, anyone who will be distributing the paper survey for this year's point in time. The purpose of this video is to walk you through the different questions so you feel comfortable asking these questions or answering questions if people taking the survey have them. At the top of the survey, you will write down the county where you are conducting the survey and your full name, so that way if people who are doing data entry in the future have questions, they can reach out to you for clarification about what was written on the survey. Before I continue with the questions, I want to mention that this is a 3-page survey. It would be only a 1.5-page survey if you are interviewing a person who slept by themselves on the night of the count. Meaning if you encounter someone on the street and it's just one person, you ask them, where did you sleep on the night of the count? They say, I slept in my car. Were there any other people with you sleeping in your car on the night of the 28th of January? And they say no. Then that would be that besides themselves, there would be 0 adults, 0 children, and the survey would end there. However, if it is if you encounter this person and they say, actually in my car was another adult and a child, then you would continue with the survey to complete that information for the rest of the household members. So in that case, it's a 3-page survey. I would highly encourage you to staple these pages. They are numbered, and stapling them will help them keep each copy separate from others, so that way the data entry doesn't get mismatched with incorrect information. So at the beginning of the survey, you're going to ask them, have you been asked about your housing situation today? If they say yes, you stop there. If they say no, client doesn't know, or client prefers not to answer, you can continue with the survey. Something that is not mentioned explicitly here in the paper survey is the purpose for conducting this point in time count. We will provide this information in the volunteer training, or it will be in the volunteer training after January 21st. But if you are asked about what is this point in time count survey about, it's to ask people about their housing situation on a particular night of the year, in this case January 28th. So we, as the Indiana Balance of State, we can provide this information to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, so we can have access to funding to help people in unstable housing situation. So next is the prior living situation. This is where we will ask them where they slept on the night of January 28th, 2026. There are different options: emergency shelter, transitional housing, motel, hotel paid by provider. You will notice that for these 3 options, there is a space where you will need to write down the name of the emergency shelter they stayed at that night, or the name of the transitional housing, or the provider that provided them with a voucher so they could have a motel or hotel stay on the night of January 28th. This is very important because this will indicate the data entry people where they need to enroll these people, under what project they need to enroll them. So make sure that you capture this information and write it down. If they say place number for habitation, there is nothing to write there. Just keep in mind that a place number for human habitation could be a street, car, abandoned building, anywhere that is not a safe place for a person to sleep. The next is none of the above. If none of the above and between the ages of 14 and 24, please see supplemental youth survey. So a caveat here, um, ask your point in time coordinator if the supplemental youth survey will be available for you to distribute. This is an electronic survey only. So if you do not have the supplemental youth survey available and the person said none of the above, then you can move on. You can thank them for their time and or yeah, you can move on. You can continue with the survey, I meant to say. However, if you have access to the supplemental youth survey and the person did not sleep in any of these first four options and they are between the ages of 14 and 24, then you would transfer to the supplemental youth survey that is in the electronic version only. Again, ask your point in time coordinator to see what is the case for your region. The other options are client doesn't know, client prefers not to answer. You will see these two options for all of the questions. Those are totally valid options. So when you are asking the questions yourself, just make sure to point out that they can stop this survey at any time. They don't need to answer a question if it makes them uncomfortable, and the answers client doesn't know or client prefers not to answer are completely acceptable. The next three questions will be asking about the length of time they've been experiencing homelessness. And this is so we can calculate their chronicity experiencing homelessness. So the first question, or the third question in this case, asks, how long have you been sleeping in this place? 1 night or less, 2 to 6 nights, and so forth. So that is in this place, meaning the place where they slept on the night of January 28th, 2026. The next question asks them, what is the approximate date this episode of homelessness started? What this is referring to is if there was a period, say within the last year, where for 6 months they were staying with a family member, not a place of their own. They were maybe staying on a couch, their family member, for 6 months. And then after those 6 months, for the next 3 months, they've been in an emergency shelter. Then that last episode of homelessness would have started those last 3 months. It wouldn't count if the person was staying with a family or friend. So, that is important to remember, you as the person conducting the survey. So again, encourage them to enter an approximate date. They don't need to obviously remember exactly when that was. But if they don't know, or if they prefer not to answer, please enter 12826, just so the data entry people can have that and enter that in the system. Otherwise, they won't be able to continue with their intake. The next question asks, how many times have you been on the streets, in an emergency shelter, or a safe haven in the past 3 years, including today? People experiencing homelessness are in a state of a struggle, and it can be uncomfortable to look back in time, or it can be stressful to do so. So just make sure that when you're asking these questions, you're very caring and sensitive, and encourage them to just have an approximation of the number of times. Same with the question about how many months have you been experiencing homelessness on the streets, in an emergency shelter, or safe haven in the past 3 years. And you'll notice that it's only in these three places, right? Again, you can encourage them, and you'll be able to get that information. So here you will enter the number of months. The following questions are questions about their personal identifiable information. So the first question here in that section is what is your first and last name or initials? And just reassure them that this is for deduplication purposes only. We don't want to double count people, and this information will not be shared with anyone. The information shared with HUD, or the Housing and Urban Development Department, is aggregated data. So this information is just for deduplication purposes. Then you ask them what are their last four digits of their social security number. If they do not feel comfortable providing that, you can leave that blank or write down no data collected. The next is their date of birth or age. It's important to have this information as well. So if they don't feel comfortable with providing their date of birth, the age or the year of their birth would be just fine. The next questions are about their race and ethnicity. Notice that it says please select all that apply, so just make sure you communicate this to the person if they are taking the survey by themselves. Question about their sex. Question about have they served in the U.S. Armed Forces. There is a text here. It says Armed Forces, meaning the Army, the Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard. So have you served in the U.S. Armed Forces, in the National Guard or Reserves, and notice that being called to active duty by the President. Active duty begins when a military member reports to a duty station after completion of training. So once you specify what this is talking about and they understand, then they can answer to whatever option applies to them. The next question is asking about, do you currently have a condition that is long-term and that keeps you from living independently? This could be any long-term condition that they feel is keeping them from living independently. The next question asked about whether they've experienced any of the following. They can select all that apply. Have you ever experienced domestic violence? If they say yes, you will go to the next two questions. If they say no, or CLAN doesn't know, CLAN prefers not to answer, you can skip the next two questions. For the purpose of this video, we're going to say the person did experience domestic violence. The next question asks, how long ago did the domestic violence experience occur? They have different options there. They'll choose one of those. And then, are you currently fleeing domestic violence? And then the last question, if it is just a one person, is asking, excluding yourself, how many adults, meaning 18-year-olds or older, and children, 17-year-olds or younger, are there in your household who stayed with you on the night of January 28th, 2026? If none, please type 0. So again, this is asking, as part of your household, was any other than you sleeping with you on 1/20/26 at this shelter, transitional housing, place meant for habitation, or staying at a hotel motel with you using a voucher provided by a provider. So if they say 0, then that is the end of the survey. However, if they say more than 0 for either or both adults and children, then you'll go to the next section. So here you read, if there is more than one person in this household, please read the prompts carefully and complete the fields below. Write the number of the response as their response. For example, if the person said yes to the question below, have you been interviewed about your housing situation today? Yes is number 1. So you would write number 1 next to person 2, person 3, etc. for the question it applies. So if person 2 said, yes, I have been interviewed about my housing situation today, then you would type 1 and you would end the survey there. However, if they say no, or CLAN doesn't know, CLAN prefers not to answer, you would continue with the survey. The following questions, except for this one that I'm going to talk about in just a minute, are the same as the ones that we've covered previously. This question, however, is different. It is asking, what is your relationship with the head of household? The head of household being the person you interviewed first. They have different options, and they can choose one of those. Then something important to note is that some questions have this italicized that says only for 18-year-olds or older. So if one of the people in the household is a minor, then you would skip that question for that person. But if they are 18-year-old or older, then you would proceed asking these questions about how long they've been sleeping in this place, and you would type down the number of the answer that applies to that person. The next question asks about the last time their episode of homelessness started, and the following questions are the same ones that we have reviewed. Just keep in mind to read this italicized text and ask the questions only to those that apply. So for example, for their personal information, that is a question that applies to anyone, meaning under 18 or 18 or older. So you would, in this case, write down their first and last names or initials. Same with their date of birth or age or year of birth, their four last digits of their social security number. Race and ethnicity, here they can select all that applies. So say person 2 considers themselves American Indian and Asian and Black or African American or African, then you would type the following options separated with a comma. Next is asking their sex. The next question is about the whether they've served in the U.S. Armed Forces or in the National Guard or Reserves and been called to active duty by the President. You would type down the number of the response that applies to them. Then it asks about whether they have a condition. This one applies to everyone. Same with, have they experienced any of the following? And then the questions about domestic violence that only apply to adults. And you will type down the number corresponding to their situation. Not type, but write down. And then that is the end of the survey. Now, before we conclude with this video, something I do want to point out is if you are interacting with minors, obviously ask the parent, the guardian, if it is okay for you to interview the children or to get an idea of any information that they would be comfortable sharing. Be very sensitive with the questions and how you ask them. Encourage them to add approximation dates, number of months, number of times, and reassure them and thank them for their time for taking this survey. These are this is information, people, that we want to help, and it's important that you understand that conducting the point in time count is a way to gather this data and advocate for people experiencing homelessness so they can be housed. So that is the end of the survey. If you have any questions, please reach out to the HMIS help desk at ihcda.in.gov. And again, thank you so much for your time. We'll see you in the next one.